The story I'm going to tell today is about an event that happened when Guy traveled to visit his relatives in a province in the south. When he arrived, his uncle, who was a hunter, was preparing to go into the forest. Guy and another friend asked to join him on his trip into the forest. However, the forest, which was full of beauty and richness, hid mysteries in every corner. These mysteries were just waiting for the sun to set to come out and hunt their prey at night. This story is called Hunter of the Forest. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. The entire story took place when Guy was about 16 years old. At that time, his family had rented a car to go on a trip and visit relatives. The destination was a province in the south, with Nico being the driver for the journey. Guy's family arrived at his uncle's house around noon. Upon arrival, they saw that Guy's uncle was preparing the necessary supplies to go into the forest. This uncle worked as a hunter, primarily gathering forest products to sell. When he saw his nephew, Guy, he invited him to join the trip into the forest. As a 16-year-old boy, Guy eagerly accepted the opportunity for an adventure in the southern forest. Nico, the driver, overheard the conversation and expressed interest in joining the trip as well. The uncle had no objections and mentioned that they could all go, but there were only 2 hunting platforms in the forest, each capable of accommodating 2 people. One of the platforms was already reserved by Nell, a fellow hunter and friend of the uncle. With 4 people in total, they would just fit on the platforms. After agreeing on the plan, the uncle told Guy and Nico to prepare their own gear. The southern forests at that time were quite lush and humid, as the region experienced 8 months of rain and 4 months of sun each year. The path to the uncle's house was very rugged and remote. The house itself was situated at the foot of a mountain with a stream from a waterfall running through the area, providing a beautiful natural view. The uncle and the other hunter led them into the forest. They began their journey at around 2 in the afternoon, taking nearly 2 hours to reach the hunting platforms. The platforms were set up across from each other on 2 trees, slightly offset from each other. Upon arrival, the uncle instructed everyone to climb onto the platforms. Guy shared a platform with his uncle, while Nico shared the other platform with Nell. From their platform, Guy could see a small open grass field to his left. As he and his uncle were setting up their supplies, they heard the sound of wild animals from that direction. Guy turned to see a herd of about 20 deer in the clearing. He didn't ask his uncle any questions at that moment since his uncle hadn't yet prepared his gun to shoot. He glanced over to the other platform and saw Nico and Nell watching the herd as well. As the deer slowly moved out of the forest, 2 men appeared, following the herd. The 2 unknown men Guy saw were wearing sarongs and shirts similar to Morham shirts. They had woven hats with square shapes on their heads and carried wooden sticks in their hands. It seemed like they were herding the deer out of the forest, which raised a question in Guy's mind. Are there people who raise deer in this forest? At that moment, Guy recalled the rules and guidelines his uncle had mentioned before entering the forest. Once you step into the forest, no matter what you see, hear, or encounter, you must not speak, ask questions, or call out. While on the platform, they were not to call each other by name. The signals to communicate various situations involved whistling, One whistle followed by a single reply whistle meant everything was normal. However, two reply whistles indicated that something was wrong. This was why Guy refrained from asking his uncle about his suspicions. The herd of deer gradually walked past their platform, with the two men herding them from behind. At that moment, the two men walked directly under the platform, without looking up at Guy and his uncle, as if they didn't notice them watching from above. Soon, both the herd of deer and the two men disappeared into the dense forest. Once the sounds of their footsteps faded away, everyone returned to preparing their equipment for use on the platform that night. As dusk settled in, the chorus of insects began. Suddenly, Nico loudly exclaimed that he needed to relieve himself and asked to go down from the platform. Hunter Nell, who was on the same platform as Nico, forbade him, saying he couldn't go down and that he should relieve himself into a bag and dispose of it outside the forest later. Nico, not accustomed to being on the platform, insisted that he couldn't do that and eventually went down to take care of his business. After finishing, he climbed back up to the platform. Guy's uncle, who witnessed this, seemed visibly displeased with Nico's actions. The night in the quiet, vast forest passed with the flickering flame of the oil lamp they had lit. No animals appeared for them to hunt. After several hours, a man's voice suddenly called out from below the platform, "Nico, Nico, your wife is very sick. You need to leave the forest and take her to the hospital quickly." Nico, forgetting the rules, shouted back, "What's wrong with my wife?" There was no response to Nico's shout, but before anyone could say anything, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the forest. Guy turned to see his uncle aiming his rifle and firing below the platform. Guy was startled, thinking his uncle had just shot someone. After shooting, his uncle didn't say anything but turned to look at him with a face that clearly showed displeasure at Nico's actions. The atmosphere returned to silence. Not long after, Nico cleared his throat loudly and spat down to the ground below, prompting Hunter Nell to scold him. "Hey, you can't do that. I told you not to throw waste from the platform," Nico retorted. "The forest is just a forest. What's the big deal?" Guy's uncle shook his head, saying nothing. After several hours, another mysterious voice called from below. "Whose black car is parked at the foot of the mountain? Do you know it has rolled down the mountain?" The shout caused Nico to panic and exclaim, "Damn, that's my car." He prepared to go down, but Hunter Nell grabbed him, saying, "If you go down, you'll die. Don't you remember the agreement we made before entering the forest?" Despite the warning, Nico struggled free and climbed down. Guy's uncle, seeing the situation deteriorate, fired another shot into the ground below. Guy saw a shadow, presumably the man calling out, "Run into the forest." The forest returned to silence, signaling that something was wrong. In the stillness of the vast forest, they could almost hear their own breathing. Suddenly, Nico, who seemed to have calmed down, sprang up and climbed down the platform, running back the way they came. From above, everyone watched as Nico ran in circles beneath the platform. Guy wondered why his uncle and Hunter Nell didn't call out to Nico, but fear kept him silent. After a while, Nico stopped running and knelt on the ground, exhausted. Before he could catch his breath, the sound of mysterious footsteps emerged from the forest, like something running through the leaves and branches. heading towards Nico. Uncle quickly raised his gun to his shoulder, aimed expertly, and within moments fired a shot. As soon as his eyes locked onto the target, he pulled the trigger, causing the large wild boar responsible for the earlier footsteps to collapse and die right in front of Nico, who was panting on the ground. At that moment, Guy saw Nico instinctively bow down to the ground, pressing his forehead to the earth. He stayed in that position for a minute, even though the wild boar's carcass lay before him. Then Nico looked up, bewildered, and with a shaky voice said, "Oh, am I still near the platform?" After speaking, he quickly climbed back up to the platform. Once Nico was back on the platform with Hunter Nell, he started mumbling to himself, "Once I leave the forest, I'll offer a whole live cow." The three of them exchanged glances but said nothing, letting Nico mutter to himself. After that incident, there were no more signs of wildlife passing below. The forest returned to a profound silence, so quiet that even the wind and insects seemed absent. Amidst this eerie stillness, Guy, scanning the area nervously, noticed an unusual movement. The trees were swaying and rubbing against each other, creating noise, despite there being hardly any wind. Then Uncle softly said, "Stay still. Don't do anything. Sit quietly and don't sleep until dawn." Uncle's warning instilled fear in Guy, and after that, Uncle remained silent all night. During the long wait for the first light of day, Nico kept repeating the same phrase, "If I get out of the forest, I'll offer a whole live cow." His incessant muttering added to everyone's anxiety. As the first light of dawn pierced through the forest, Uncle and Hunter Nell told Guy and Nico to climb down from the platform. However, it was a bit challenging for Hunter Nell, as he had to help the ailing Nico down. Once safely on the ground, they went to inspect the wild boar Uncle had shot, discovering it was an old, large boar. Due to its size, it would be difficult to remove it from the forest, so Uncle decided they should head back to seek help from the villagers to retrieve the boar. On their way back, Hunter Nell continued to support Nico, who was still muttering the same phrase repeatedly. During their return, the group stumbled upon the carcass of a large, emaciated tiger. Uncle and Hunter Nell decided to take a closer look to determine where the tiger had been shot, and Guy joined them. Uncle pointed out a deep indentation on the tiger's forehead and said it was impenetrable. Guy, puzzled, asked Uncle who had shot the tiger. Uncle explained that it was the same creature from last night that had called Nico to go to his wife. Uncle had remembered that last night was Saturday, the 5th of the 5th month, a time when the vengeful spirit of the tiger demon was particularly strong. If Nico had gone down in response to its call, he would likely have become its prey. They decided to leave the tiger's carcass there and later get the villagers to help bury it and retrieve the wild boar. After returning home, Nico suddenly fainted and collapsed to the ground. Everyone had to help Nico to rest, and Uncle asked Guy and Uncle's wife, who were at the house, to keep an eye on Nico's condition. Uncle and Hunter Nell then went to gather villagers to help deal with the carcasses of the tiger and the wild boar in the forest. While Uncle was seeking help from the villagers, Nico regained consciousness. Uncle's wife asked Nico a strange question about whether he had said anything to the forest spirits last night. He replied that he had said nothing and made no promises. At that time, Nico seemed to be recovering but had apparently forgotten the words he had previously muttered. Guy later learned that Uncle had instructed his wife not to tell Nico about the live cow he had mentioned earlier, but to ask what Nico had said or promised instead. After Nico said he made no promises, he suddenly coughed up blood from both his mouth and nose. However, the blood was not red but a nauseating black color. Uncle's wife then went to fetch a local shaman, who was regarded as a spiritual healer in the area. When the shaman arrived and saw Nico's condition, he knew exactly what to do. For anyone afflicted by forest spirits, the shaman would have his disciples prepare a cow for sacrifice. When the disciples brought the cow, something unexpected happened. Nico got up and started eating the cow raw, without it being cleaned or bled. Shortly after, Nico vomited everything he had eaten. After the shaman performed the cleansing ritual, Nico's condition gradually improved. The shaman then ordered his disciples to prepare another cow for Nico to offer at the forest shrine. After completing the ritual, it coincided with Uncle and the villagers bringing out the large wild boar. Uncle told Guy that the tiger was no longer in the same place. Uncle then explained that last night had been the 5th of the 5th month, a time when the vengeful spirit of the tiger demon was particularly strong. Nico's actions had angered it. Uncle decided they would have to relocate the platform because if they continued hunting from the same spot, the tiger spirit might return to harm them. After speaking with Guy, the villagers and Uncle butchered the wild boar and divided it appropriately. Uncle then asked Nico where he intended to run to after climbing down from the platform and why he bowed down under the platform. Nico began to recount that after climbing down, he aimed to run back to the forest entrance where the car was parked, but didn't realize he was running in circles under the platform. He bowed down because he heard a mysterious voice commanding him, "You must bow to me." So he bowed down as he heard. Uncle explained to Nico how fortunate he was to hear that voice because when they first entered the forest, Nico had said an ill-fated phrase, "This forest is beautiful. I want to live here." Uncle explained that this was a forbidden phrase, as locals believed that uttering it would cause the spirits to take the speaker as a substitute, trapping their soul in the forest forever. Guy then took the opportunity to ask Uncle if there were people who kept deer in the forest. Uncle explained that the person they saw with the deer at first was not a human but a guardian spirit protecting the animals. If the spirit allowed them to hunt, they would only see up to 3 animals. If they saw a herd like they did initially, hunters would immediately know not to hunt. This was a hunter's way of understanding the spirit signs. After a successful hunt, Uncle would refrain from entering the forest for 3 to 7 days, believing that the forest spirits had granted the animal. Following the incident, Nico exhibited strange behaviors, such as howling like a wild animal and experiencing severe bone pain, preventing him from moving. Nico's condition persisted for 2 or 3 years until he eventually passed away. Guy later asked Uncle if Nico's strange condition was related to the events of that night in the forest. Uncle simply said that what Nico did went beyond what they could see or know. They could not be certain how Nico had provoked or offended the forest spirits, but the locals knew well not to say or do anything inappropriate.